what I'm going to do is probably ask a few questions, this idea of tell me more. So instead of saying yes to everything, you should say, tell me more. And in that tell me more, you're asking, is there funding? How much time is this going to be? Is this going to be published somewhere? If so, where? Do you have experience doing this? And getting all of this recon, doing all this recon so that you have a much more informed decision. And honestly, even with that information, you can go back to your personal board of directors and ask them their opinion. And so you could only do all of this work if you have paused and you have not impulsively said yes.
There's a little snippet from today's interview with authors and emergency room physicians Dr. Adaira Landry and Dr. Resa Lewiss. It focuses on the concept of microskills, which are built on one singular principle. Every big goal, complicated task, healthy habit, and even what we think of as character traits can be broken down into small, learnable skills that can be practiced and incorporated over time. They're going to share why success does not have to mean sacrificing our own well-being, but rather that they can be the key to success in the first place. Dr. Landry is an assistant professor at Harvard Medical School and an emergency medicine physician at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and she co-founded Write in Color, a nonprofit teaching others the art and skill of writing. She lives in Boston with her 3 daughters and husband. Dr. Lewiss' resume is similarly jam-packed. Among a long list of accomplishments, she is a professor of emergency medicine at the University of Alabama at Birmingham and hosts the Visible Voices podcast. She lives in Philadelphia. Combined, Drs. Landry and Lewiss have written for CNBC, Fast Company, the Harvard Business Review, Nature, Science, Slate, Stat News, Teen Vogue, Vogue, USA Today, and the Philadelphia Inquirer. And they've been quoted and featured in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Guardian, and the Huffington Post. Thank you for joining us here on the Catalyst 360 podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brad Cooper, CEO of Catalyst Coaching 360, and I love this topic of microskills as it offers us all a practical means. Not theoretical, some people can do this, but a practical means which we can all utilize to take those someday steps right now. Thank you so much for joining us in the midst of your own busy week. If you're a coach, 2 items to note. Number 1, time is running out if you're planning to join us for the annual Rocky Mountain Coaching Retreat and Symposium up in Estes Park, Colorado this September. It's a gathering of coaches from around the country, and it is truly the coaching event of the year, something you don't want to miss. Details on our Institute site, catalystcoachinginstitute.com, and there is still an early registration discount available as I'm recording this. For those of you who may be considering pursuing your MBHWC approved coach certification, either to start a new career or perhaps to expand your toolbox as a physical therapist, physician, counselor, or other related role, Catalyst Coaching Institute has been consistently recognized as one of the nation's top certification programs and might be worth a look. In fact, Fortune magazine just named us their #1 program. It's a big decision, so please, if you'd like to talk it through, reach out to Susanna, our Chief Learning Officer, and she'd be happy to set up some time to answer your questions. Her email, susanna@catalystcoaching360.com. You can also access details on that same website, catalystcoachinginstitute.com. And now, it's time to turn micro skills into macro living with Drs. Lewiss and Landry on the latest episode of the Catalyst 360 podcast. All right, Dr. Landry, Dr. Lewiss, it is so good to have you here. Thank you for joining us. I'm excited about your book. Micro skills, so important to everything, whether it's for the coaches that are listening, that are trying to coordinate their schedules and logistics, or if it's folks that are in their personal or professional, even athletic lives, trying to make this stuff happen. So excited about this topic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Let's just set the stage. What are these things called micro skills, and why are they so important?
A micro skill is a bit as it sounds. It's a small skill. It's a large goal, an insurmountable task, a character trait, a habit that seems overwhelming and large, and it's broken down into small, concrete, fundamental units, building blocks. And these build upon each other to ultimately achieve that goal, that project, et cetera. And also they translate and they're additive. So they thread across all micro skills, and they're actionable and easy to apply real time.
And are they logistical in nature, or are they habitual in nature, or are they character development in nature, or yes?
Probably a combination of all of them. I mean, when we built this book, we wanted to teach people a framework so that as they navigate through, even a few chapters, they sort of understand the process here of like breaking down this large goal, such as how to be a better communicator, into very small, little, measurable micro skills. In regards to, are they habitual? Perhaps. I think that's not our goal, is to create habits. I think our goal is to really create a skill set, and then you having the understanding or the insight as far as when they're needed. And to also recognize that, learning a skill set in one area is transferable and applicable in many other areas too. And so we think they actually are quite transferable and additive.
Let's chase that rabbit trail a little bit. Example of one that you develop in this area of life that you've seen translate to other areas of life.
Nourishing relationships with people you trust.
Okay. I
think, we talk a lot about the self, and our first chapter is Microskills for self-care. And our first microskills is nourishing relationships with people you trust. And we're talking about personal relationships, right? The people who live in the house with you, your family, your friends, your personal board of directors, the people you go to for individual personalized issues or conflicts. But those skill sets of, listening, being empathetic, giving, not just taking, understanding what someone's skill set is and how they can help you, that translates to when you're building your network and you're building your professional network and your personal board of directors, those people who are going to be peers and colleagues, supervisors, who are going to be able to help you and support you and navigate difficult situations as well. That skill set of being able to interact with people and nourish a relationship and strengthen it, and also recognize when it's been weakened, like those skill sets inside the workplace and outside of the workplace, I think are very related.
I love that. And our listeners will be saying, oh my goodness, this fits so nicely. We talk about the catalyst cornerstones all the time, and that's move, fuel, rest, and connect. And what you said about the micro skills interacting with each other and supporting each other is exactly what we talk about all the time. If you improve, as you said, your communication, your connection, your relationships, that then improves your likelihood of exercising, your likelihood of eating better, your likelihood, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If your sleep improves, that improves these things. So yes, no doubt. You work across many tips, and we love the practical stuff here. So I want to jump into these. Let's jump into a couple of tips for each of these. And I've written down about 7 different categories. Let's start with self-care. You mentioned that's the kickoff chapter. But what would be a couple tips that you would say fits into this idea of micro skills when it comes to self-care? And then we'll just work our way through self-care, task list, communication, et cetera.
So our chapter 1 is Microskills for self-care. And that was intentional because generally speaking, workplaces don't teach their employees how to take care of themselves. It's not modeled. It's not lauded. And what industry better as an example to talk about that is medicine and healthcare. And who better to talk about that and write about that than emergency medicine physicians?
Exactly.
So we subscribe to this concept of the self, the team, the work. And the goal is to really be good with yourself, taking care of yourself. And when we talk about health and taking care of yourself, sure, we're talking about the physical body, but we're also talking about financial health, social health, mental health. So our chapter 1 is Microskills for self-care. And for example, we talk about, as Adaira just shared, building your personal board of directors. We talk about finances and taking care of your financial health. And actually, this is not a finance book. And also, the skills that we talk about in terms of thinking about your finances are some of the similar skills that we talk about in the other chapters. For example, communication, a workplace task list, developing subject matter expertise. In the microskill to take care of your financial health, we do talk about, for example, finding out your benefits where you work, contributing to a retirement plan, doing a financial audit, things that are by no means comprehensive that you would find in a finance only book, but really talk about people, especially that are entering the workforce, entering their early to mid career, even going into college. And we actually spoke with someone recently who thought that this was even applicable to a Boy Scout troop, kids in their preteen years. So there are many sort of life stages that these apply to. So the other thing that I'll talk about that microskill wise in our chapter 1 is we talk about personal hygiene and care of your body. And people have been like, wow, that's interesting. I
had the same response. That? Yeah, I saw it and I went, huh.
And yet, the story for the audience that hasn't read the book yet, every microskill is illustrated with a small story, a vignette, real story that's happened to Adaira or to myself. And from that story, we talk about the actual microskill and express why it's important, and the reader should think about it. And then we say, wait a minute, this is hard. We get it. And then finally, we break it down into the actual how-to, those we call critical actions. So we start with a story, one I had of working with a medical student who had very, very strong body odor and how I dealt with that situation. And, we throughout the book, these are not just, Adaira Resa opinion. This is actually supported in the literature. Some of the suggestions, assertions, why we think this is important. And it has been shown in published literature that grooming and neatness of appearance actually play a role in your ability to get promoted and your ability for people to believe in your contributions as a worker, as a team member. And, the caveat is we say, in the instance of something like a change in someone's grooming, a change in someone's health habits, brushing teeth, odor, check in with the person, make sure they're okay. So we approach all of these microskills to the best of our ability with a very understanding lens of you have to really think about what might be happening in the work environment with yourself and with your people.
All right, next up is task lists. There's a lot I can ask you about that, but we'll end up chasing those paths in a few minutes. So task lists, what have we got in terms of tips for task lists?
I'll start with what I think is the most important one, and that is understand what your supervisors expect of you. I think a lot of people, so Resa and I are both educators and mentors. I'm currently an advisor for the medical school here in Boston, and I have a lot of students who just don't understand what they should be doing with their time. And so a lot of times they're just filling in the space, packing their plates without a clear vision or direction. And so we wanted to start with understanding what your supervisors expect of you, because that really should be one of the first things you're doing when you're entering a workplace. Or even if you've been there for a while, you're feeling lost. Like, I'm not really even sure what I should be doing with my time while I'm here. And I know that there are many people who feel that way. So we start with a story, a true story. These are all true stories. This is a story that I share about a few years ago. I was at a seminar, and a more senior male faculty member was talking about how when he was a fellow, he and his co-fellow, a woman, were tasked with organizing these luncheon seminars.
Sure.
And she created these beautifully designed invitations and ordered this special artisanal food every time it was different, and personally invited everyone. Whereas he spent very little time. He sent out a poorly templated email with no, paperless post type of attachment, and had pizza and water for lunch. And he sent all of the emails at once. And in the end, he got promoted and she didn't. And he speaks a lot to the fact that he knew what mattered to his supervisors, and he knew that they couldn't care less about how this organizational thing, behind the scenes part worked. They just needed it done. And he spent more time doing research, giving talks, giving lectures, because he knew up front that that's what the supervisors valued, and that was what was going to get him the job. And so we actually think that insight is really important, especially for people who might be entering a workplace and they don't have mentorship. They might feel underrepresented or marginalized because no one looks like them or no one has the same background as they do. And so they might not have readily accessible guidance being offered to them. It's really important to go back to your supervisors and let them know, I'm feeling lost. I'm wondering how I'm doing. And so the micro skills that we talk about are, just as basic as reading the company website, just to understand what is the priority of the place you work at. But then from there, obtaining a job description and seeing what is actually your assigned duties. Are you satisfying those roles? And I think this is probably the most important thing, is scheduling a one-on-one check-in with your supervisor and saying, like, these are the tasks I'm working on. This is my job description. They might not align that well. What do you want me to prioritize? And then soliciting targeted feedback, like, how is my work? Is this exactly what you're expecting of me? Am I behind? That upfront check-in, that this whole process would save a lot of time for people who are feeling lost and just like doing random things at work.
Fantastic tip. I'm thinking of the person that walks in thinking they're playing hockey and it turns out to be a basketball game. You've got to know, what field are we on? Now, my question for you, though, for the person who says, well, but the boss's expectations don't match up with my vision, and the two of you talk about vision, what advice would you have for that person when they come to that realization besides go find a different job? Or would that be your recommendation?
When you say vision, are you talking about like expertise, like the subject matter expertise they wish to pursue?
More, yes. Personal vision, professional vision. Where am I heading? Where am I going as an individual? What is my place in this world? That element of personal vision versus, or in congruence with, depending on the situation, the supervisor's expectation.
Yeah. I think building upon what Adaira just shared and then bringing up that skill we talk about in chapter 1 of the personal board of directors. This is the time to speak with some of your personal board of directors, brainstorm, talk with them, set up meetings. We have a whole chapter on networking and the importance of networking and developing relationships that stick. So people with whom you've developed sticky relationship, it might be time to have a meeting, discuss with them. And, there's a few different approaches. When we wrote the book, we did talk about, like, are we speaking to the person that's leading the team, or are we speaking to someone who's on the team? Because your ability, your flexibility, arguably your creativity changes over time and depending on your position in the workplace.
We're writing this book. I'm a physician who has scheduled shifts every week, and my boss expects me to be there. And if I were to say, yeah, but I'd rather do this book because that's my vision, like, I'm going to get in trouble because I have to meet those minimum expectations of what my boss is telling me to do. Like, I think it'd be really hard to maintain your job if you are ignoring those minimum expectations, right? The basics. I think when there's room left over to do your own personal vision, it's great to rope that supervisor in. Like, I tell my boss all of these things that I'm doing, even though it's not part of my job description. I let them know, like, hey, look at what your employee is doing in addition to their work. And I've only received positive support from that. But I could imagine that if I stopped showing up to my shifts and I was like, but look at this really cool podcast I was on, like, it's not going to work. Right. And so there is this idea of, like, there are duties for anyone who is employed and they want to maintain their employment that they should, respect. And then when you have this surplus time and you start talking about what's my expertise and how do I build a brand and how do I make a big name for myself, that's probably when you're going to start doing that work. But I would do it with the support of your supervisor and include them as much as you can, because they, from my perspective, I am obviously N of 1. I've only found that to be helpful for me.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. All right, let's shift to communication. Where do you take us here in terms of tips?
So, go. Yeah, go. You got it.
I think we talk a lot about body language and using that and reading the body language of other people. And this is one of those skills that, like, I don't know if anyone is being taught how to use their body or interpret the body of other people and the movement and gestures in a classroom, right? Like I went through high school, college, residency, fellowship. Never was there a session on how you should move your eyes when you're annoyed, right? Like you just have, that's like on the job learning. And also it relies very heavily on someone sitting down next to you and giving you feedback. And many times, maybe we'll get to it later when we get to the topic on difficult conversations, many times it's just easier to ignore someone's sort of unusual or annoying body gesture and never give him feedback. So this person just continues thinking it's A-okay to, throw their hands up in the air when they're upset because no one's told them, hey, that seems really aggressive or disproportionate to the scenario. Like they've never received that feedback. The other thing is that it's really hard sometimes to, especially when we're talking about different cultures and generations in a workplace, it's really hard to interpret someone else's body language.
Absolutely.
Even, it's hard in the in-person world, but it's really hard now in this hybrid world. And so we definitely wanted to point that out, that it's a challenge, especially with Zoom, and now we're using Slack. And, but it's also really important to understand that this is a big part of communication and it can drastically affect your reputation.
Let's skip a couple categories and come back, because you led nicely into the difficult conversation, the navigating conflict area. What would be the guidance there? And add on to that, what is the role of the supervisor in helping the team members develop their micro skills? So your book is perhaps directed to me, how can I improve mine? But how can a supervisor then also bring this to their team in an effective manner that matters?
I would say of all the skills, it really seems to resonate with people that are mid to late career. This one does, because it's hard. And I think it's human nature to avoid conflict and to avoid difficult conversations. And I would say in my own experience, I've had quite a few supervisors, and maybe one has modeled it in a way that I thought, gosh, I want to manage and navigate conflict in that way. So I share a story of when I realized while I was delivering a difficult conversation that it had been handed off to me so that my supervisor didn't have to do it. And the person and I were in conversation. We both had this aha realization. And of course, it reflected poorly on the supervisor. So we have a statistic that conflict is a reality of every single workplace, and it takes up hours in the week, billions of dollars per year in what to do and how to resolve some of this conflict. So in the chapter, we start out and saying to the reader, listen, realize your role in conflict and acknowledge that role. We also talk about psychological safety because even if we're not directly a part of that conflict, we are often indirectly witnessing it and what to do. We talk about when there is conflict and difficult conversation and you're getting feedback, what to do if that feedback is really upsetting or kind of takes you off track, and how to sort of frame it for yourself and move on. In that same chapter, we also talk about competence versus confidence. And then, when conflict sort of raises to a level of really being affecting of your health and maybe even something you would want to define as a toxic workplace, to really start thinking about, we walk the reader through a paper trail, human resources and the role they serve, and observing how bad behavior is handled. And, these are kind of tough topics, even like that people are like, wow, you wrote about that? Or like, oh yeah, I've been wondering what to do about that. But we didn't want to be afraid of not tackling some of these topics and being as comprehensive as possible when talking about this book about the workplace.
All right.
I think.
Well, go ahead. I want to get into the ER piece of this.
Well, I think the reason why this chapter is necessary is many of us, especially when we're younger, we learn how to navigate conflict through watching our parents, our siblings, interacting with our siblings, which is very different than how we might expect to navigate conflict in the workplace. And so you can't necessarily bring your most authentic self and your raw emotions to every single conflict in the workplace. And I'm going to argue you shouldn't really do that at home either. But there's definitely different levels of acceptances as far as how we discuss these challenging topics. And I think a lot of people learn this the hard way by addressing something when they're too emotional. I think it's okay to have some emotions, right? Sure. We're not going to be emotionless, right. but too strong of emotions, too impulsive, right? Like not having that restraint, sending that angry email at 3 a.m. because you can't sleep, like just learning to hold back on some of those decisions is a skill. It's something that, again, most of us learn it the hard way, but boy, wouldn't it be great if someone gave me a heads up early in my career? Like if I'm ever really upset with someone, pause before I start going off and telling someone exactly what I think they need to hear.
I love the sentence in your intro. Do not expect someone to save you or your career. You are completely responsible. It reminds me of Seth Godin's Choose Yourself, very, very popular blog that he wrote. This phrase, it doesn't really fit in today's culture. We're supposed to, we hit a wall and assume it can't be us because, it's somebody else's fault. Build out that statement for us a little bit more and what you meant by that and where our opportunity exists with that. I think it's a critical statement to get out there. And I love that you included it.
We say no one is coming to save you. And what we want is to inspire the reader to really take care of themselves. And that taking care of themselves, in the case of the book, is professionally. And so we start an introduction with 3 basic truths to illustrate the sense of no one is losing sleep over whether or not you're getting promoted. No one is losing sleep. Did you finish your slides for your talk that you're about to give? Those 3 truths are: time can only be spent. We are all not starting from the same starting line. And learning is limitless if it's accessible. And I'll start and go a little deeper into the whole time. We want the reader to think about time as a currency. However, this currency you can't put into a savings account. You can't save it. It's always being spent. It's always being spent. In the emergency department, we task switch all the time. If something gets taken off the plate, something else comes on the plate. I mean, even if you're working from home, like if you're not working on one task, you can switch to the next task, and then you can get up and, have a snack, et cetera, et cetera. Time can only be spent. And therefore, we want people to be intentional about how they spend their time. And we're saying, hey, we respect your time. We respect the time with the way we wrote this book. So it's an efficient read that you can apply right away. And so you should be intentional with how you're spending time and also with whom you're spending your time.
And it's one thing to say, be intentional. How do I filter that?
It's a great question. So I think as people develop maturity, competence, and confidence with these skills as an example, I think people start to know themselves better. And this goes back to our premise of the book that everything starts with the self. Once you're good with yourself, then the team, then the work. And all those things are happening on a continuum and together. It's not like you're stopping to make sure like you're your most perfect self before you can then be, paying attention to the team. But I think that the more people are in touch with the subject matter expertise they want to develop, what their next job opportunity they seek, the more they can focus themselves and focus their time. And we have a microskill about taking things off the plate. And this is actually another reference to Seth Godin, who I'm a big fan of his books and of him. And he, in The Dip, talks about quitting things, that we should regularly quit things and take things off our plate so that then what's on our plate are ideally the things that are truly giving us joy and truly a focus of where we want to put our energy and our time. And also finally, that we should just make art and put it out in the world, which I think is just a beautiful thing.
Yep.
I want to comment on the other 2 truths. So the second one is the world is not equal. This really speaks to the idea that we all enter the workplace with different networks, pedigrees, bank accounts, personal physical identifiers, skill sets, right? And so when we are just starting out, even if you and your peer have the same title, there's no way you are truly in the exact same state.
Yeah.
And it really speaks to the idea that, I've been in charge of all sorts of mentorship programs before writing this book, where I would say, okay, everyone who's in the program gets one mentor, and I'm just going to, fill out this simple survey. I'll match you somehow. But it really wasn't geared towards like someone's comprehensive needs. Right. And so you could see how some people already have a ton of mentorship and a ton of support, and one person might have zero, but they're getting the same resources.
Yeah.
And so it just really speaks to the idea of like being cognizant that it's not going to always be the same for you as it is your peers. And it really goes back to this idea of no one's coming to save you. We wanted this book to be very prescriptive is the word. And it's funny because we're doctors, but like telling people what to do, because there's this playbook, this, secret mystery playbook that some people get access to and others don't have. And I've seen it, Resa's seen it, and maybe you've seen it too, Brad, where you're looking at your other colleagues and you're like, how are they able to just make these things happen, right? Like I have a colleague with like 2 very successful nonprofits doing really well with research, huge grants, and we both have 24 hours of the day. Like, what is it that this person is doing? Like, how are they able to get this all together? And there's just some secret tips and tricks that really points to the idea of like, even though we're the same amount of years out of training, this person has gained a lot more. And that speaks to the fact that we're not always equal. The last truth is that learning is limitless if accessible. That really hones in on this idea of like, if you are able to be taught certain skills, gain key insight, it's probably going to be easier for you to achieve your dreams and your ambitions. We talk a lot about how there is this access to information that some of us get. And in the book, I have a story about, I was watching a colleague of mine. We're the same level of training and out of residency. And, this person was getting multiple grants, multiple publications, speaking, everything. And I had literally none of that, though we were the exact same institution, same department, same level of training. And I went up to this person and I said, how is it possible that you were able to get all of these opportunities? Like, these people are coming to you and just handing you stuff. Like, how are you getting them to just offer you these opportunities? And he looked at me and he said, Adaira, no one is offering me anything. I'm doing it all myself. And here's the micro skill he taught me. He says, I draft my own letters of recommendation. And then I go to someone and I say, can you nominate me for this opportunity? And I had no idea that that was possible, that like you could draft your own letter of recommendation. Like, no one had told me that I could do that. No one told me that I should do this and then pitch the idea to someone else that they submitted on my behalf. I had no idea. And come to find out, this is like a commonplace thing. Like, people do this all the time. And it was that small change, that small skill of drafting my own letters of recommendation that totally changed the game for me in learning how to advocate for myself and hunt down opportunities and say, I'm going to go for this.
It's a perfect example. Nice. Email secrets. You please help us with this one. It's a positive section of your book. And I just thought, wow, we all need this one. So dig into this one. Give us a few practical tips on the email front.
The background for writing this book is Adaira and I started writing articles, and we call these proofs of concept. We're like, okay, we can write well together. We are writing stuff that's resonating with a broad audience because we were placing these in outlets such as Harvard Business Review and Fast Company. So we knew we were onto something. And one of our first successes was having a compassionate email culture. And much has been written about this concept of inbox zero and trying to worry about your own email inbox. We flipped it. We said, stop worrying about your own. Think about other people's email inbox. We all think we're good at it. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I could be better at this. And I didn't realize. We talk about being thoughtful about when you send emails. And you can write the email, get it off your mind, get it off your chest, but schedule it to send during work hours. We also walk through, most people know about the 2 line and the CC line, but we really build out the BCC, the blind carbon copy, which has a negative reputation and people use it. What's the word? Nefariously, because I wanted to use that word right there. And we really push back on that. We don't want people to use it nefariously. We actually want it to be a part of that compassionate email culture toolbox. And so the BCC can be a way to thank someone. Brad, you introduced me to someone in your network and you say, take the conversation from here. I reply to that person and I place you in the BCC and I say, dear so-and-so, so great to meet you. Thank you, Brad, parentheses in BCC. So you know where you are. The person to whom I'm writing knows where you are. And I've now saved you being on that whole email string.
Perfect.
Yeah. So the compassionate email culture, and we can be better. We can always be better. One final one I'll add, and then there's a slew more, is about the sending. And you can schedule. Some people are like, how do you do that? Almost every email software program allows you to schedule the send of the email message. We have friends who work night shifts, they're nocturnists, or, we're all working at different hours. So some people add to their signature line, I only respond during business hours, or I write mine during off hours. There's no expectation of reply until you're back in the office and you're at your working hours.
I think one of the things that we really wanted to emphasize as we wrote this book is the delivery of immediately actionable pieces of advice or strategy. And so we, when it comes to this, all of these email changes that we're suggesting, like you can start that day. Like you don't have to take a course. You don't have to get another degree. It's as simple as it's Friday night. You bought this book and you have to send an email, but you're like, I'm not going to send this email on a Friday night because I know my colleagues should be resting. It's the weekend. They have family. They have a partner, whatever. I don't want to disrupt them. So instead of sending this email out, I'll draft it and I'll schedule it to be arriving on Monday at 9 a.m. And that's an immediate change that now starts to impact not just you, but the culture of your workplace, because they see it. Sometimes I put it in the email like, hey, it's Friday night, I'm drafting it, but you're going to get this Monday morning, just to, again, remind them that this is the culture I'm trying to create of drafting the email whenever it's convenient to me, but I'm thinking about the other person when it gets there.
Well, and what a great phrase. I think there are some magical phrases that pop up, and you've just created one with this compassionate email culture. I don't even need guidance with that. Just thinking of that phrase shifts the mindset, shifts the action. You almost don't need the next 5 steps with that, because you've given me such a great tool in thinking about, oh, wait, is this a compassionate approach to the email? So excellent. Love that. All right, let's jump back into money. You mentioned a few things around the benefits. Make sure you're taking advantage of your 401k, that kind of stuff. We had Rachel Cruz, daughter of Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University, as a guest, and people loved her insights. Can you give us some of the key elements on the financial side that you think might get missed by a lot of us outside of the benefits piece?
I think saving is really important. So as physicians, this is going to shock you because many of us know that we are high salary earners. And yet in most medical schools, I think this is slowly changing, in most medical schools, residencies, fellowships, and even faculty development sessions, there is minimal training on how to manage your salary. Yep. That is like crazy to me. When I'm speaking to colleagues, or early trainees, and they still don't know what a 401k is. We actually, most of us use the term 403. We have a 403B, but it's equivalent. It's a retirement account. Or, Roth, traditional Roth, back to work. Like they've never heard these terms before. And it's not their fault, right? Because we're sort language. it's a different language, and we're also really cultured to not care about money, right? Like we're here because we're altruistic. We care about the patient. And so it's not really emphasized. And yet you graduate with like hundreds of thousands of dollars of loans. And you're like, how do I pay this back? I have no training. So we wanted to give the context of what it's like just for anyone who might be lost. Like Resa said, this is not Dave Ramsey's podcast where he's going into all sorts of strategies. But if I remember correctly, Dave Ramsey's pretty big on saving. Like he's like not absolutely. An overspender. Yeah. And so I've listened to a bunch of his shows in the past, but, just living below your means is really important. And, not overspending, understanding how much you're supposed to save, understanding the landscape of your debt. A lot of us will hide behind this idea of like, I'm just going to ignore my debt. And when I get my life together, I'll tackle it. It's like, that's really scary to hear because the interest is still accumulating. Right. And so just being knowledgeable, that's honestly our mission. Our mission is not to teach everyone everything about debt about personal finance, because there's no way we can do that in like 12 pages. Right. But we can start the conversation of like, become aware of how much you earn, how much you spend, how much you're saving, and where you're saving it, right? Are you saving it in a retirement account? Are you saving it in this low interest savings account? Like just being aware of those things early on is a huge head start. It's a huge head start for that early career professional who's just like, I have a paycheck, I'm just going to spend it. I'm going to go get a very expensive apartment.
As part of our critical action for many of these microskills is encouraging people to read, watch online videos, listen to podcasts. And so Adaira and I had a similar experience of coming out of training and having quite a bit of debt. Not the same story, not the same experience, not the same numbers, but similar feeling what to do. And I started reading. And one of our microskills that we talk about is this concept of direct deposit and automating. And I was really into this book called Smart Women Finish Rich. Same author, David Bach, wrote The Automatic Millionaire. It's the same concept of just make it automatic, pay everything, direct deposit, emergency fund. And, these are some basics that get repeated no matter who you read.
Right. Yeah, there's no doubt. And I think talking about the interest rates on loans, I think a lot of people have never heard the rule of 72, that your money doubles or disappears as soon as you hit that 72. So if you're at 10% interest 7 years from now, your growth will double. But by the same token, your credit card debt, if it's at 10%, and many are much more than that, that means your credit card debt will double in 7 years, all things being equal. So some of those tips. I'm watching the clock. I want to make sure we get these few other questions in here kind of running through. We're not going to get to everything, but what have you found to be the most difficult to integrate into each of your own lives? As you look at it and you say, yeah, we wrote it, but this was more one I personally struggled with. Can you walk us through that personal experience?
I'll start. And it was removing I'm going to use the word toxic because I truly think it is toxic phrase, say yes to everything. We were taught early on in our careers to say yes to everything. And I think it's a well-intended message of expose yourself to all opportunities. You never know what you're going to like. You never know what's going to end up being the big thing for you. What's going to just skyrocket your career. But you can imagine how that messaging is driven by a lot of fear, right? Like it's like you are going to miss out.
Missing out piece. Yeah.
You're missing out. And so it becomes FOMO. You're just like all afraid. And so a lot of times, especially for myself early on, if someone came to me with an opportunity, I said, yes, that sounds great. Yes, let's do it. And my plate got packed. I fell behind. I felt overwhelmed. I probably was burning out because I just had too much going on. I couldn't say no. I didn't know how to say no. I felt guilty saying no. And so I have over time, as Resa said earlier, with experience, you just gain more knowledge. And I recognize that if I started to say no just a little bit, like, let's see what happens. And I'll see if I still have my job. And so I did. I started quitting things and slowly saying no. And every job that I've had remained. I was like, oh, I can probably quit a little bit more. And then the other thing is I pause. I pause a lot now. So if someone comes to me with an opportunity, for instance, I just was invited to co-host a podcast. I probably am going to say no because I don't have time, but I haven't replied yet because I'm going to talk to some people about it and look at my schedule and think about it and draft a response and edit the response, right? I'm not impulsively saying anything. And what I'm going to do is probably ask a few questions, this idea of tell me more. So instead of saying yes to everything, you should say, tell me more. And in that tell me more, you're asking, is there funding? How much time is this going to be? Is this going to be published somewhere? If so, where? Do you have experience doing this? And getting all of this recon, doing all this recon so that you have a much more informed decision. And honestly, even with that information, you can go back to your personal board of directors and ask them their opinion. And so you could only do all of this work if you have paused and you have not impulsively said yes.
I love that. The tell me more. The purposeful pause, the power of the pause, and then the inquiry, the research, the background instead of the knee jerk. And it probably is a compounding effect of the more you're doing that, the less you accidentally fall into things. So now you have more time to reflect, more time to pause, more ability to pick and choose. So as you've said with your other micro skills, Dr. Landry, it seems like that one really plays on that compounding effect.
It will affect your whole career if you have less on your plate. It'll affect your sense of self. It'll affect how much time you have to integrate with your team, and it'll affect your work. You might have work that is more aligned with you.
Yeah, beautiful. Dr. Lewis, how about yourself?
I'm going to talk about Microskills to become a subject matter expert, because I think consciously or unconsciously, it's been threaded throughout my professional journey. I trained in emergency medicine and I did a fellowship in what is called bedside ultrasound. It's also called clinical ultrasound. It's also called emergency ultrasound. And finally, it has a name called point of care ultrasound. So I was an early adopter. I did a fellowship when not a lot of people were doing fellowships in this. And what I saw was many colleagues were being invited to speak, and they were doing grand rounds and they were publishing. So early on, I appreciated this currency, in this case, not time, in this case, not money, but this currency of getting published. And I noticed that certain people were getting invited to speak, and I was not getting those invitations to speak. So I want to highlight the chapter, because when Adaira and I were working on this, we're like, how do we tell people how to become a subject matter expert? And how do we know when someone is, because when someone has expertise and is that person, but how did they get there? And what is it that they do, where, say, that characterizes them as a subject matter expert? So I was really trying to wrap my head around this. And I called one of my friends who's a chair of an emergency medicine department. And I said, how do I get grand round speaker invitations? And she said, oh, you want to come speak? My admin will email you and you can come speak. And it was one of those, like a little bit of like, you have to ask, right. But also that, no one's coming to save me. And, I have, other stories of how I started becoming a writer and then how I started having speaking opportunities. But, I'm going to mention I have a podcast similar to you having a podcast, and it's called The Visible Voices. And I cover healthcare, I cover equity. And my goal was to amplify people and their voices and their subject matter expertise. And generally, it's people who historically aren't tapped to speak, who aren't necessarily recognized as the subject matter experts. And this goes back to one of our truths about the world is not equal. And so I think even being recognized for subject matter expertise, it's sometimes related to you and it's sometimes not related to you. And then I'll tie this up with a bow and say, when Adaira and I decided to write this book, and when people see us as authors, they're like, oh, this is a book for women. And we're like, nope. And like, oh, it's a book for doctors. We're like, nope. And similar to when you're in the airport and you see that table of business self-help books, and all the authors may or may not be maybe similar, like C-suite business, maybe similar demographic groups, just like there's no question that they're writing for a general audience. So similarly, we're convinced that we wrote a book that really is relatable and applicable to a general audience. So.
Okay, two more. I love this comment you make in one of your microskills about offload routine tasks that bring you no joy or purpose. When I saw that, I was just like, yes. However, many people are going to hear that and say, yeah, easy for you to say, I can't do that in my work, or I can't do that in my personal life. What is your message to folks whose at least initial response is that kind of
It happens to us too. There are certain tasks that I have right now that I cannot offload. It's just part of my job. And so I think about what else I can do, right? Like I have a particular title right now. It's a very small thing on my to-do list that I can't get rid of. It's just part of my employment contract is that I have to have this role. And so I wouldn't be able to get rid of that, but I can look elsewhere. And there are some tasks, honestly, at home that are much more in my control, that I can offload. And what happens is, in turn, I feel more rested and I feel happier, even when I'm thinking about my work. And so, yes, you have to sort of find those things that are optional. We don't want to give the message that you are offloading the core aspects of your job description. That's not the message. It's the optional things that you don't have to do. Or maybe there are some things that are negotiable and you could talk to your supervisor about. And there are many things at home that are optional. The first was, for me, a house cleaner. I wasn't able to do that all the time, but now I save hours a week from not having to clean my house. And that has been really helpful. And we have found all sorts of other things that we can outsource within our house that saves us time so that I'm not so physically exhausted all the time.
So what can I control? That's the message. I can't control this, but what can't? It's constantly asking that question. Am I hearing you right?
You are hearing me right. You have to always think about the list of things that are, I would say, you can control or are negotiable, because there are some negotiables within the workplace. And I think it's worth discussing, again, when we go back to what your supervisors expect of you. There might be some things that are like, hey, you ask me every meeting to take notes. No one's reading these notes. It takes 2 hours to do this. Can I instead do like bullet points, 1 or 2, or can we rotate so other people can do it? Can I record the meeting, right? Like there's some negotiable things there, but it starts first with doing an inventory of what you're responsible for, right? And this can be a very long list depending on the person, and what can be offloaded, what can be delegated.
But just like your budget, you've got to tune into those things first
before
you can pick and choose. Yeah. Audit's a great word. All right. Last question. Writing a book is such a big task. Congratulations. Well done. If you were to add a chapter today, what would it cover? I'd love to hear from each of you on this.
I'll start. I'm going to start with a microskill I'd add and a chapter. So the microskill I'd add is we talk about health, and we don't we more indirectly address civic health. And I think coming out of the pandemic, given some of the politics in our country, I would add that as a microskill, and that especially with privilege and with ability that we should advocate and be civic minded.
Nice.
A chapter that I think we will have to incorporate and add, and maybe this wouldn't be a chapter, but actually a piece in each chapter, is AI.
Very good.
Yeah, I was thinking probably something more direct about the hybrid environment. We started this book in 2021, so it wasn't quite clear exactly what the workforce would look like. Right. Yes, but I think now a chapter designated to working in a hybrid environment would be really helpful. I think a micro skill that could be helpful too is like understanding your energy level and like how to manage your energy.
Yes.
Would be interesting to talk about.
Love it. Love it. You too. Thank you so much. This is such important stuff. You've done a great job with this. Good luck with everything. We'll have links to your book so they can find you and your work as we move forward. But really, really appreciate the time.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
And now you're thinking back to her original quote that we threw out there of tell me more. There's so much more to this. Hopefully you'll tap into it in their book. If you're an employer, EAP, or wellness service provider looking to offer the very best in coaching to those you serve, Catalyst Coaching 360 is the clear solution. Catalyst focuses exclusively on coaching, their area of expertise since 2007, the same year the iPhone was first released. You no longer use a BlackBerry as a phone. Why continue to settle for old school coaching models? Catalyst doesn't just provide coaching. Catalyst is coaching. And it can be integrated into any program or platform essentially overnight. If you'd like to discuss details, please reach out anytime. Results@catalystcoaching360.com or visit the website catalystcoaching360.com. And now it's time to be a catalyst. This is Catalyst Coaching 360's Dr. Brad Cooper. Make it a great rest of your week, and I'll speak with you soon on the next episode of the Catalyst 360 podcast, or maybe over on the YouTube coaching channel.